The game just declared open war on Kendrick Lamar, and Drake got caught in the absolute crossfire. I'm not talking about subtle shots or subliminal disses. I'm talking about a full-scale, career-threatening assault that dropped out of nowhere and has the entire hip-hop industry on absolute lockdown right now. This man released 4 tracks under the Gangsta Grillz banner with DJ Drama, and every single bar is a calculated execution aimed straight at the king of the West Coast. And folks, this might be the most dangerous moment in hip-hop we've seen in years. Now, everybody thought they knew where the game stood in hip-hop, right? The Compton legend, the West Coast soldier, the guy who stood next to Kendrick when the torch was being passed. That was the version we all believed. But new music just dropped, and the entire narrative is twisting in ways nobody saw coming. See, when these 4 tracks hit streaming platforms under the Gangsta Grillz series, people initially thought it was just new music, just the game doing what he does. Then fans started really listening. They started breaking down the lyrics bar by bar, line by line, and what they discovered was not music. This was a declaration of war. This was the game systematically dismantling everything Kendrick Lamar and Drake have built, and he did it with the kind of precision that makes you realize this wasn't spontaneous. This was planned. This was personal. And this was revenge. Let me walk you through exactly what's happening on these packs, because once you hear the breakdown, you'll understand why the industry is in absolute panic mode right now. Track 1, Chrome Hearts. The opening salvo. Chrome Hearts comes out swinging, with the game immediately attacking the concept of a king. Now, for anyone who doesn't follow hip-hop closely, let me give you context. Kendrick Lamar is universally recognized as the king of the West Coast. Not debated, not questioned, accepted. But the game opens this track essentially saying that crown means nothing, that the so-called ruler has no real power. And listen to this. Industry insiders who've been analyzing these lyrics are saying the references are too specific to be about anyone else. The geographical markers, the timeline references, the competitive history, everything points directly at Kendrick. And what makes this hit even harder is that the game was there. He was present when Kendrick was being elevated to the pat position. He co-signed it. He celebrated it publicly. And now he's trying to demolish it. That kind of betrayal, that cuts different. Track 2, America's Nightmare. But then, it gets so much worse. We get America's Nightmare. And this is where the game goes from personal attacks to industry exposés. We're talking about allegations of radio manipulation, fake streaming numbers, artificial buzz created behind the scenes. He's basically pulling back the curtain and saying some of hip-hop's biggest moments were engineered, not organic. And here's where Drake enters the equation. The game mentions Drake's name. Not subtle, not hidden in wordplay, direct. And after that mention, he starts talking about podcast beefs that were allegedly manufactured for publicity, streaming numbers that don't match real-world impact. The implication is brutal. These dudes aren't floating on legacy, they're floating on illusions. Now, online detectives, because fans turned into full-blown investigators the second these tracks dropped, they started cross-referencing the gang's claims with actual industry data. They're pulling up streaming analytics, comparing chart positions to touring numbers, analyzing social media engagement versus reported popularity. And folks online are swearing they're finding discrepancies that match what the game is alleging. Is it all factual? That's speculation until proven. But the way he's saying it, that suggests he might have receipts we haven't seen yet. Track 3, Grammy Grievances. The third layer of this attack focuses on awards, specifically Kendrick's Grammys. And the game's approach here is calculated and absolutely cutting. He's not congratulating, he's not celebrating hip-hop excellence, he's weaponizing those achievements. The message screams from every bar. You get praised, you get recognition, you get the accolades. Meanwhile, I get ignored. And that resentment is not new. sources close to the gang camp have been whispering for years that he feels overlooked by the industry despite his contributions to West Coast hip-hop. But he stayed relatively quiet about it. Until now. That Grammy section reads like a man who's been keeping score for years. Every award Kendrick won, every critical praise Drake received, every time the game's name got left out of best of conversations, he's been collecting those moments like evidence. And now he's presenting them as proof of systematic disrespect. That's not just competitive fire. That's deeply personal grievance going public. Track 4. Left out, the point of no return. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared anyone for Left Out. This track sounds like a mental breakdown caught on recording. I'm talking about raw, unfiltered rage bleeding through every single bar. The production is aggressive, the delivery is visceral, and the content, folks, this is where the game crosses every line there is to cross. He's shouting, literally shouting in parts that he's not excluded, that he's not forgotten, that his legacy stands on its own. Ironic, but the emotion in his voice, the desperation in the delivery, it proves exactly how deep that wound goes. You don't rap with that level of intensity about something that doesn't bother you. And then he drops the bombs. Fuck your album. Fuck the one you said won. Both Kendrick and Drake in the same breath, publicly executed on wax. But it gets even more disrespectful. The game compares himself and Drake to basketball legends, and not just any comparison. Listen to this. Drake equals Vince Carter. The implication being Toronto loyalty, sure, but also what? A player who never won a championship, someone who's remembered but not revered. The game equals Kobe Bryant. LA immortality, 5 championships, legend status that can't be questioned. That's not competition. That's complete erasure. That's saying you might be good, but you'll never be me. And the baby boy references, calling back to Tyrese's character, throwing out legacy challenges, every single line reads like a receipt file coming due after years of perceived disrespect. Track 5, so contagious, expansion of warfare. Just when listeners thought the fire can possibly spread further, so contagious happens, and this is where the game expands his targets beyond just Kendrick and Drake. New York gets called out. SZA, one of the most beloved artists in contemporary R&B, gets caught in the absolute line fire. And Kendrick's legendary Control verse, the one that shook the entire industry back in 2013, gets challenged head on. The game declares, not suggests, not implies, King of LA and King of New York. The level of audacity in that claim is staggering. You're talking about claiming supremacy over 2 of the most historically significant hip-hop cities. 2 coasts, 2 entirely different cultural landscapes. The subtext is crystal clear. If you disagree with this claim, this situation gets uglier. If you think I'm overstepping, say something, because I'm daring anyone to dispute me right now. That's not disconfidence. That's a trap, because any response legitimizes the beef and silence looks like agreement or fear. Now, let's get into the motive, because this is where everything starts clicking into place, and you realize this didn't just come out of nowhere. The game has been dealing with serious career and personal struggles for a while now, and understanding that context makes this entire situation make sense, even if it's absolutely chaotic. The career trajectory. Think about the game's journey for a second. This man came out in 2005 with the documentary, one of the most critically acclaimed debut albums in hip-hop history. He was signed to Aftermath Entertainment. He was working with Dr. Dre. He had 50 Cent executive producing his album. He was positioned to be the next West Coast legend. And for a while, he was. Multiple platinum albums, hit singles, respect from both coasts. The game was moving like royalty in hip-hop circles. But then things started changing. Album sales started dropping. Features became less prominent. The mainstream spotlight started shifting to newer artists. And while the game maintained a loyal fan base, there is no denying his commercial relevance decreased significantly over the years. And meanwhile, and this is key, Kendrick Lamar's star was rising to astronomical heights. Drake was dominating both hip-hop and pop culture. These were artists who came up after the game's peak, and they were achieving levels of success that exceeded what he had accomplished. People who were around the game during this period reportedly say he was dealing with that shift hard, because it wasn't just about sales or charts, it was about watching artists. He influenced artists who looked up to him surpass his achievements and get the recognition he felt he deserved. That kind of professional jealousy, that's real. That's human. And when it festers for years without being addressed, it explodes exactly like this. The financial element. Let's keep completely real about something else. Money, because finances play a massive role in this situation, even if the game won't admit it directly. Reports suggest that the game's financial situation has been complicated. There have been publicized legal issues, child support battles, reports of debt, stories about lifestyle maintenance that doesn't match current income. Now, I'm not saying he's broke, like we don't have access to his bank accounts, but the public perception is that he's not moving with the same...
The loyalty element. And there's another layer here that people aren't talking about enough. Loyalty. The game has always represented himself as the ultimate West Coast loyalist. He's from Compton. He's carried that flag proudly his entire career. He's spoken in interviews about what West Coast hip-hop means to him, culturally, personally, spiritually even. So when Kendrick got elevated to King of the West Coast, the game publicly supported it. He co-signed it. He was photographed with Kendrick at events. He spoke respectfully about Kendrick's talent in interviews. But internally, sources close to the situation say the game never fully accepted it, that he saw himself as more deserving, that he felt his contributions to West Coast hip-hop were more significant, that he believed the crown should have been his if anyone was getting one. So he smiled publicly while hurting privately. He played the supportive OG role while feeling completely overlooked. And that kind of internal conflict, that dissonance between what you show the world and what you actually feel, that eventually breaks people. The breaking point. So what pushed this to the surface now? Honestly, it could be a combination of factors. Maybe a recent slight that felt like the final straw. Maybe seeing Kendrick and Drake's continued success while his own momentum stalled. Maybe financial pressure forcing a publicity play. Maybe just years of accumulated resentment reaching critical mass. But the timing is interesting. These tracks dropped under Gangsta Grillz, which is a legendary platform, but also one that doesn't require traditional label support. That suggests this might have been a move the game made independently, possibly because a label wouldn't back this level of warfare. And if that's true, that means he felt so strongly about getting this message out that he was willing to potentially damage industry relationships, burn bridges, and risk his own reputation to do it. That's not just competitive beef. That's someone who felt they had no other choice but to go nuclear. Now here's where this gets even more disturbing, because what we've heard so far, industry whispers are saying that's just the trailer. That the real carnage, the truly career-ending material, is being saved for the documentary 3. The documentary 3 threat. Sources close to the game's camp, and obviously this is all alleged because no one's going fully on record, but these sources are suggesting that he's been sitting on verses for months. Full songs, potential diss tracks that make these 4 Gangsta Grillz tracks look like warning shots. One insider reportedly described the documentary 3 as mutually assured destruction. The implication being that if that project releases as planned, multiple reputations could be damaged beyond repair. We're not talking about hurt feelings or damaged pride. We're talking about revelations and allegations that could reframe entire legacies. And think about the implications of that for a second. If the game is willing to release material that could destroy his own legacy in the process of attacking others, because that's what mutually assured destruction means, then we're dealing with someone who's reached a point where he literally has nothing to lose. That makes him incredibly dangerous, because people with nothing to lose don't play by normal rules. They don't care about consequences. They just want to cause maximum damage on their way out. The jealousy timeline. When you actually track the game's relationship with Kendrick over the years, there are moments, small things, that didn't mean much at the time that suddenly make so much more sense now. Like, remember when Kendrick won the Pulitzer Prize in 2018? Huge deal. Historic achievement. First non-classical or jazz artist to ever win it. The entire hip-hop community celebrated. Tributes poured in from everyone. The game's response? Publicly supportive, said all the right things, posted congratulations on social media. But people who are around him during that time reportedly say that his private reaction was very different. That he made comments about how the Pulitzer was political and didn't actually reflect the best rapping. That he questioned whether Kendrick's album was even lyrically superior to his own work. Or go back even further when Kendrick dropped the Control verse in 2013 and called out basically every relevant rapper. The game responded on wax. At the time, people interpreted his response as competitive fire, just hip-hop being hip-hop. But looking back now, there were lines in that response that suggested deeper insecurity. References to legacy, claims about who really runs the West Coast. Defensive posturing that seemed excessive for someone secure in their position. The jealousy didn't start recently. It's been building for over a decade. We're just seeing the explosion now. The irony of destruction. And here's the part that's almost tragic in how ironic it is. Kendrick Lamar, Drake, Absol, and J-Rock, all of the game's current targets, are people who helped build his earlier legacy. Think about the collaborations, the co-signs, the features. These were mutually beneficial relationships at one point. The game elevated younger artists by associating with them, and those artists added contemporary relevance to the game's brand. But now, those same collaborators are positioned as enemies. The very people who stood beside him are being painted as obstacles to his recognition. That's a complete rewriting of history driven by resentment. And the sad part is, if the game continues down this path, he's going to erase the positive aspects of those relationships from public memory. Puddinger's coming soon. That's the definition of self-sabotage. Retaliation concerns. Now, the bigger question everyone in the industry is asking is, what comes next? Because this level of public disrespect doesn't just sit unanswered. Especially not in hip-hop culture, where responding to disses is part of the fabric of the genre. Kendrick Lamar has historically been selective about which battles he enters. He doesn't respond to everyone. He moves strategically. But the game hasn't left him much choice here. The attacks are too direct, too public, too damaging to ignore completely. If Kendrick does respond, it's likely to be surgical, not emotional, not reactive, but calculated, well-researched, and designed to end the conversation permanently. And given Kendrick's track record with diss records, that should terrify the game. Because Kendrick doesn't just attack your music, he attacks your character, your legacy, your entire existence in the culture. Drake, on the other hand, represents a more unpredictable variable. He's currently dealing with his own controversies and beefs. Getting pulled into this situation might be something he tries to avoid, but if he feels his reputation is threatened enough, Drake has the resources, the platform, and the fan base to make the game's life very difficult. And then there's the possibility of tag team responses. What if Kendrick and Drake, who have had their own tensions over the years, temporarily unite against a common enemy? That's happening to hip-hop history before. Mutual threats create strange alliances. The game would be facing a two-front war he cannot win. Industry fallout. Beyond the individual artists, there's a massive concern about industry relationships being permanently damaged here. The game has worked with dozens of high-profile artists, producers, and executives over his career,
Many of those people have also worked with Kendrick and Drake. This beef forces everyone in the game's professional network to potentially choose sides. Do they continue working with the game and risk alienating Kendrick and Drake, two of the most successful artists in the industry? Or do they distance themselves from the game to maintain those more lucrative relationships? From a pure business standpoint, the answer is obvious. Kendrick and Drake represent significantly more commercial opportunity than the game does at this point in their careers. If forced to choose, most industry professionals will follow the money, which means the game might be inadvertently isolating himself even further with this attack. The recognition and respect that he's fighting for might become even more out of reach because he's burning the very bridges that could have helped him rebuild his career. The silent strategy. Now, here is a wild possibility that some people are discussing. What if Kendrick and Drake just don't respond? What if they recognize that any response legitimizes the game's claims and gives him the attention he's clearly seeking? What if they make a calculated decision that the best way to dismiss these attacks is through complete silence? That would be devastating to the game's goals here, because if you drop what you consider your most explosive material and the targets don't even acknowledge it, that sends a message that you're not worthy of their attention, that you're not on their level, that you're screaming into a void while they continue operating at heights you can't reach. Silence as a weapon. That might hurt more than any diss track ever could.
But let's pull back from the industry politics and competitive drama for a minute and talk about the actual human beings in the middle of this situation. Because when beef gets to this level, it's not just about artists and their egos. There are real people, families, friends, loved ones, who get caught in the absolute crossfire. The families affected. Think about Kendrick Lamar's family for a second. His fiancée, Whitney, his children, his extended family back in Compton. These are people who didn't ask to be part of a public warfare situation. They're just trying to live their lives while one of their family members happens to be famous. But now, because of the game's very public attacks, they're potentially dealing with increased security concerns, worry about their loved one's safety, stress about how this might escalate, the emotional burden of watching someone they care about get viciously attacked in a public forum. And before anyone says, that's part of being famous, yeah, public criticism comes with celebrity, but there's a difference between music criticism and what the game is doing here. He's not critiquing Kendrick's artistry. He's attacking his character, his legitimacy, his right to hold the position he's earned. That kind of attack hits different. That affects how you move through the world, how safe you feel, how you trust people around you. The mental health aspect. And let's be real about something we don't talk about enough in hip-hop. Mental health. The psychological impact of being publicly targeted the way Kendrick and Drake are being targeted right now. Both of those artists have been relatively open, by hip-hop standards anyway, about dealing with pressure, anxiety, and the weight of expectations. Kendrick's music frequently explores themes of mental struggle. Drake has discussed feeling isolated despite his success. So imagine already dealing with those internal battles, and then someone you formerly had a cordial relationship with releases multiple tracks systematically trying to destroy everything you've built, questioning your achievements, calling your success fake, painting you as an industry plant or a manufactured product. That's not just competitive pressure. That's psychological warfare designed to make you doubt yourself, your work, your worth. And mental health professionals will tell you that kind of sustained public attack can have real psychological consequences. Increased anxiety, depression, paranoia about who to trust, difficulty separating valid criticism from hateful noise. We've seen artists have breakdowns over less than what the game is currently doing. And I'm not saying Kendrick or Drake are at risk of that. They've both shown remarkable resilience with their careers. But acting like this level of attack has no emotional cost, that's ignorant. The collateral damage. And then there are the people we don't see who are being affected by this. Engineers who worked on the game's tracks, producers, management teams, label executives. These are people whose professional reputations are now tied to a project that might damage their relationships with other artists. DJ Drama, whose Gangsta Grill's platform is hosting these tracks, he's a respected figure in hip-hop with relationships across the industry. How does hosting the game's warfare affect his ability to work with Kendrick, Drake, or artists in their circles in the future? Or what about younger artists who look up to the game and now have to navigate supporting someone whose career strategy has become public destruction? Do they publicly back him and risk alienating themselves from the mainstream industry? Do they stay silent and potentially disappoint a mentor figure? These are real professional and personal dilemmas that don't have easy answers. The cultural impact. Beyond individual people, there's a broader cultural cost to this kind of warfare that we need to address. Because hip-hop culture, especially on the West Coast, has been intentionally moving away from destructive beef for the past decade. After the literal deaths that resulted from East Coast, West Coast tensions in the 90s, there was a collective decision to handle competitive energy differently, to keep it on wax, to keep it artistic rather than personal, to not let egos and hurt feelings escalate into real-world violence. The game's approach threatens that progress. Not because he's personally calling for violence, he's not, but because the level of disrespect in these tracks creates an environment where fans feel emboldened to take things further than the artists intended. We've already seen fans arguing in comment sections, threatening each other, creating divided camps that view this as an actual war rather than competitive rep. And history shows us how quickly that energy can spiral into something no one wanted. The pressure on Kendrick, but the person I'm most concerned about in this immediate moment is Kendrick, because the amount of pressure now sitting on his shoulders is immense. If he responds, he validates the game's tactic and potentially opens himself up to an extended beef that he doesn't need while trying to focus on his own music and business ventures. If he doesn't respond, he risks looking weak or scared, which, fair or not, is how hip-hop culture will interpret silence in the face of this level of disrespect. There's no clean option here. Every possible response has significant downsides. That's an incredibly stressful position to be in, especially for someone who's always been intentional and strategic about his moves. And the wild part is Kendrick didn't do anything to provoke this. He didn't attack the game. He didn't subtweet him. He didn't undermine his legacy in interviews. He was literally just existing as a successful artist, and the game decided that success was an attack on him personally. That's deeply unfair. That's someone else's insecurity becoming your problem. That's being forced to engage with someone else's demons, even though you've done nothing wrong. The Drake complication. Drake's situation is slightly different, but no less messy. He's already been through multiple high-profile beefs in recent years. Pusha T, Meek Mill, various smaller conflicts. The public is somewhat fatigued by Drake-involved drama. So getting pulled into this situation, when he has even less direct involvement in than Kendrick, must be incredibly frustrating. Like, he's catching strays in a beef that's primarily about West Coast internal politics that he's not even part of. But because his name is mentioned and his success is attacked, he can't fully ignore it without looking scared. Yet responding means extending energy on someone who's arguably not even on his competitive level anymore. That's an annoying position to be in, having to deal with someone else's insecurity taking shots at you while you're trying to focus on your own successful career. And now I want to take some time to really analyze what's happening here from multiple angles, because the more you look at this situation, the more layers you discover. And understanding those layers is crucial to predicting where this goes next. The strategic timing question. One thing that keeps coming up in discussions about this situation is, why now?
Why did the game choose this specific moment to launch this level of attack? There are a few theories circulating. Theory 1, the documentary 3 is coming soon, and this is a publicity strategy. By creating massive controversy now, the game ensures that when his album drops, people will be paying attention. Controversy creates curiosity. Curiosity drives streams. Basic marketing strategy. Theory 2, something specific happened recently that we don't know about yet. Some behind-the-scenes slate or disrespect that triggered this response. An industry meeting where he felt dismissed. A conversation that went wrong. A collaboration request that got denied. Something that felt like the final straw after years of accumulated resentment. Financial desperation. If the game's financial situation is as completed as reports suggest, he might need a viral moment to generate income through streaming, touring opportunities, or just staying relevant enough to book paid appearances. Any of those could be true. All of them could be true simultaneously. Human motivations are rarely just one thing. They're usually complicated mixtures of ego, pain, strategy, and circumstance all colliding at once. But regardless of the game's specific motivations, there's a bigger concern here about the precedent this sets for hip-hop moving forward. If the strategy works, if the game gets the attention, the streams, the renewed relevancy seeking, what message does that send to other artists who feel overlooked? It essentially says, the way to get back in the conversation is through destruction, not through making better music, not through innovative artistry, and not through building new things. That's a toxic precedent. That creates an environment where insecure, bitter artists feel justified in attacking successful peers rather than focusing on their own growth. And we've been through this in hip-hop history before. The late 90s and early 2000s were full of this kind of energy. Established artists feeling threatened by younger talent, veterans attacking newcomers out of insecurity. And it didn't make hip-hop better. It made it more negative, more destructive, and less focused on the art. The culture spent years moving past that mindset, and the game's approach risks dragging us back to that unproductive place. The skill versus success argument. One angle that's emerged in discussions about this beef is the skill versus success debate, and it's a conversation that extends far beyond just the game Kendrick and Drake. The game's essential argument, when you strip away the emotion and aggression, seems to be, I'm just as skilled as these artists, but they get more recognition and success than I do, and that's unfair. And on a pure skill level, to be fair, that argument has some merit. The game is a legitimately talented lyricist. His wordplay is complex. His storytelling ability is strong. His ear for production is generally...
The documentary 3 implications. Every analysis of this situation eventually comes back to the same question. What happens when the documentary 3 actually drops? If industry whispers are accurate, and these 4 Gangsta Girls tracks are just the warning, then we need to prepare for the possibility that the album contains even more explosive material. But here's the gamble the game is taking. For that strategy to work, the album needs to be undeniably excellent. Not just controversial, not just shocking, but actually great music that forces people to acknowledge his skill level regardless of how they feel about the beef. If the documentary 3 drops and it's mediocre, if the music itself doesn't back up all this aggression, then this entire strategy backfires spectacularly. He'll have burned bridges, damaged relationships, and alienated potential collaborators for an album that doesn't even deliver artistically. That's a massive risk, and it reveals either tremendous confidence in his abilities or desperation that's overriding strategic thinking. Broader implications, hip-hop culture, and future consequences. Let's zoom out from the specific artists and specific beefs for a minute and talk about what this means for hip-hop as a culture and as an industry moving forward. Because situations like this don't exist in a vacuum. They set precedents, they shift norms, they change how people operate. The evolution of beef. Hip-hop has always had competitive energy. That's part of the genre's DNA. From the earliest days of battle rap in the Bronx to legendary recorded disses like Nas versus Jay-Z, competition has driven some of the best music hip-hop has produced. But there's been a shift in how beef functions in the streaming era that's important to understand. In previous eras, beef was primarily about artistry, about proving you're a better rapper than your opponent, about more creative insults, better wordplay, more devastating metaphors. The goal was to demonstrate superior skill. In the streaming era, beef increasingly functions as marketing. It's about generating controversy that drives clicks, streams, social media engagement, and ultimately revenue. The actual skill level of the diss becomes almost secondary to how much attention it generates. The game's approach sits somewhere in the middle of those two models. He clearly cares about demonstrating his skills. The bars are crafted, the references are specific, the wordplay is intentional. But the rollout and the multi-track approach and the way he's systematically targeting multiple high-profile artists, that's very much marketing-driven strategy. And we need to ask ourselves, is that the direction we want hip-hop to go? Where beef is less about artistic competition and more about strategic career rehabilitation through controversy? The responsibility of platforms. Another angle that's not being discussed enough, what's the responsibility of platforms in this situation? DJ Drama and the Gangster Girls brand gave the game a platform for these attacks. Streaming services are hosting the tracks. Social media algorithms are amplifying the controversy because conflict drives engagement. Nobody forced these platforms to participate. They made business decisions that this content would benefit them through publicity, through streams, through being associated with a major hip-hop moment. But should there be ethical considerations about platforming what is essentially a sustained assault on other artists' reputations and mental well-being? Or is the stance everything goes and artists are responsible for their own content? I'm not saying I have the answer to that, but I think it's a conversation hip-hop media and platforms need to have. Because if there are no limits to what gets platformed in the name of competitive hip-hop, where does that end? The impact on younger artists. One of my biggest concerns about this situation is what younger artists learn from watching it unfold. If you're an up-and-coming rapper watching the game go nuclear on established artists, what lesson are you absorbing? That success creates enemies? That you should expect attacks from insecure veterans as you rise? That the only way to stay relevant is through constant conflict? Those are toxic lessons for a new generation to internalize. Hip-hop needs young artists who are focused on innovation, on pushing the genre forward sonically and conceptually, on building new things rather than tearing down existing structures. But if the culture keeps rewarding destruction over creation, that's what the next generation will prioritize, and we'll end up with a hip-hop landscape that's just endless conflict with no forward progress. Just artists attacking each other in cycles while the music itself becomes secondary. The mental health conversation. Earlier, I touched on mental health regarding Kendrick and Drake specifically, but this connects to a much larger conversation hip-hop desperately needs to have. Hip-hop culture has historically stigmatized vulnerability and mental health struggles. The emphasis on toughness, on never showing weakness, on handling everything internally, that's created an environment where artists suffer in silence rather than seeking help. But we've seen the consequences of that stigma. We've lost artists to suicide, to overdoses driven by self-medication, to violent outcomes rooted in untreated trauma and mental illness. The game's approach in this beef, the level of aggression, the apparent desperation, the willingness to destroy relationships, these could be symptoms of someone struggling with mental health challenges related to career decline, financial stress, and ego threats. Now, I'm not a therapist and I'm not diagnosing anyone, but the behavior patterns suggest someone in genuine psychological distress. If hip-hop culture had better mental health infrastructure, if there was less stigma around therapy, around asking for help, around admitting you're struggling, would the game have felt he needed to handle his feelings this way?
Or Woody has had healthier outlets for processing the very real pain of feeling overlooked and watching others surpass you. The gender dynamics. Another layer that I haven't seen many people discuss, SZA getting name dropped in So Contagious. SZA is one of the most beloved artists in contemporary R&B, with a fan base that's fiercely protective of her. She's also someone who's been open about her own struggles with anxiety, criticism, and industry pressures. Dragging her into this beef, even tangentially, introduces a gender dynamic that can get very messy very fast. Because if the game says anything directly disrespectful about a woman artist in future tracks, he's going to face backlash that extends far beyond hip-hop circles. We've seen how the culture has evolved regarding treatment of women in rap lyrics. That's not something you can be casually disrespectful about anymore without serious consequences. But including her name suggests the game either doesn't care about those consequences or hasn't thought through the implications. Either way, it adds another potential minefield to an already explosive situation. The generational divide. There's also an interesting generational divide in how this beef is being received. Older hip-hop fans who lived through the 90s and early 2000s seem more excited about this. They view it through the lens of hip-hop is back and competitive energy and the good old days of real beef. They see the game as standing up for himself and refusing to accept disrespect. Younger fans, especially Gen Z hip-hop listeners, seem more exhausted by it. They're more likely to see this as unnecessary drama, as older artists being bitter, as energy that could be better spent on making good music instead of tearing others down. That generational divide reflects broader shifts in how different age groups view conflict, competition, and success. And it suggests the game might be playing to an audience that's shrinking, while alienating the demographic that represents hip-hop's future. The economic reality. We need to be real about the economic factors driving hip-hop beef. Streaming has fundamentally changed how artists make money. Touring is now the primary revenue source for most artists. Merchandise, brand partnerships, streaming pays relatively little compared to old album sale models. In that economic environment, relevance is currency. If you're not in the conversation, you don't get booked for festivals, you don't get brand deals, you don't move merchandise, you don't sell tickets. The game's streaming numbers have declined significantly over the years. His last few projects didn't generate major buzz. His touring profile has shrunk. From a pure business standpoint, he needed to do something dramatic to return to relevance. This beef is that something. Whether it's morally right or artistically justified is almost beside the point from an economic perspective. It's a business decision to generate attention through controversy because traditional methods weren't working anymore. That's depressing in some ways. It reduces artistic beef, something that used to be about proving creative superiority, to just another marketing tactic in an attention-driven economy. But that's the reality of how the modern music industry functions. The precedent for veterans. The game is far from the first veteran artist who struggle with relevance as younger talent emerges, and he won't be the last. So this situation sets a precedent for how aging hip-hop artists handled that inevitable decline. Do they go the graceful route, transition into elder statesman roles, focused on mentoring younger artists, celebrate their legacy without demanding ongoing recognition? Or do they go the game route, fight aggressively for continued relevance, attack the artists who have surpassed them, refuse to accept their reduced position in the hierarchy? Both paths have examples in hip-hop history, but the consequences of each path are very different. The graceful route often leads.
All right, we've broken down every angle of this situation. We've analyzed the tracks, explored the psychology, examined the industry implications, and discussed the cultural consequences. Now let's bring this all together and talk about where this goes from here. What we know for certain. Let's start with what's undeniable, regardless of which artist you support. The game has declared open warfare on Kendrick Lamar's position as King of the West Coast. This is not speculation. This is explicit in his lyrics. He's directly challenging the hierarchy that's existed for years. 2. Drake has been forcibly pulled into this conflict, whether he wanted involvement or not. His name is mentioned. His success is questioned. His legitimacy is challenged. He's now a participant by default. 3. This is not promotional strategy in the traditional sense. This is too personal, too aggressive, too potentially damaging to career relationships to be just marketing. This is real grievance expressed through music. 4. The industry is watching closely to see how Kendrick and Drake respond. Their response, or lack of response, will set precedents for how similar situations get handled in the future. 5. There's more coming. The documentary 3 is still pending, and all indications suggest these 4 tracks were just the opening salvo. Those are the facts. Everything else is analysis and prediction. Possible outcome 1. Full-scale war. In this scenario, Kendrick responds with a devastating diss track that addresses the game's claims point by point, while elevating the conflict to a level the game can't match. Drake either responds independently or coordinates with Kendrick for maximum impact. The game releases a documentary 3 with even more aggressive content toward Kendrick and Drake specifically. Other artists start choosing sides publicly. The beef dominates hip-hop news cycles for months. Probability moderate, maybe 35 to 40%. Why it might happen? The disrespect is too direct to ignore, and both artists have competitive reputations to maintain. Why it might not? Both artists have more to lose than to gain from extended beef with someone not at their current level. Possible outcome 2, strategic silence. In this scenario, Kendrick and Drake make a calculated decision to not respond directly. They might make subtle references in future tracks or have people in their circles address it, but no full diss records. The game releases the documentary 3, which gets initial attention, but ultimately doesn't sustain momentum without the response he's clearly seeking. The controversy fades, the gang's attempted power play fails. Probability, moderate to high, maybe 40 to 45%. Why it might happen? Silence as a weapon is incredibly effective when someone is clearly seeking attention and validation through conflict. Why it might not? Hip-hop culture still expects responses to direct disrespect, and silence could be misinterpreted as fear. Possible outcome 3. Industry mediation. In this scenario, respected industry figures or mutual connections work behind the scenes to de-escalate. Phone calls happen, meetings get arranged, some kind of understanding gets reached privately. The game still releases the documentary 3, but with less aggressive content toward Kendrick and Drake specifically. Everyone saves face without extended warfare. Probability lower, maybe 15 to 20%. Why it might happen? Too many industry relationships and business interests are threatened by prolonged conflicts. But the game seems past the point where mediation would satisfy him, and his public statements have made a backing down look like weakness. Possible outcome 4. The game self-destructs. In this scenario, the game continues escalating regardless of whether he gets responses. He releases increasingly desperate and aggressive content that starts damaging his own reputation more than his targets. Industry figures distance themselves. Collaborators stop working with him. His fan base shrinks to only the most loyal supporters. He becomes a cautionary tale about letting bitterness destroy your legacy. Probability, moderate and rising, maybe 25 to 30%. Why it might happen? The psychology driving these attacks suggests someone not thinking about long-term consequences. Why it might not. The game has shown strategic thinking in the past and might recognize when he's going too far. My prediction.
Based on everything we've analyzed, here's what I think actually happens. Kendrick responds, but not immediately. He takes his time, lets the documentary 3 drop, waits to see all of the game's cards before playing his hand. When he does respond, it's surgical. Not emotional, not reactive, but methodical and designed to end the conversation. Drake takes the strategic silence route unless the game says something on the documentary 3 that crosses a line Drake can't ignore. He's dealing with enough of his own controversies and doesn't need this distraction. The game releases the documentary 3, which gets significant initial attention driven by controversy. The music is decent, but not excellent enough to change narratives about his current position in hip-hop. Some tracks go viral for the wrong reasons. The album underperforms commercially. Within 6 months, this beef is mostly over. The game tried to reclaim relevance through warfare, and it didn't work. He damaged some relationships. He got temporary attention, but ultimately it didn't change his position in the hierarchy. Kendrick and Drake continue operating at elite levels. The game becomes a cautionary tale about how not to handle career decline. That's my read on where this goes, but honestly, hip-hop is unpredictable. We could see something completely different that nobody's anticipating. The bigger lesson. Regardless of how this specific beef resolves, there's a lesson here that extends beyond just these 3 artists. Success creates targets. And the higher you rise, the more people will resent you, attack you, try to tear you down. That's not unique to hip-hop. That's human nature. How you respond to those attacks defines your character and your legacy. Do you engage with everyone who takes shots? Do you strategically choose which battles matter? Do you let your work speak for itself? And for artists on the decline, and every artist eventually experiences a decline, that's just reality, how you handle that transition determines whether you're remembered as a legend or a cautionary tale. The game is currently at that crossroads. He can still course correct. He can still focus on making excellent music that reminds people of his talent. He can still transition gracefully into whatever the next chapter of his career looks like. But if he continues down this path of bitter attacks driven by insecurity, if the documentary 3 is just more warfare without actual artistic excellence backing it up, then he is choosing to be remembered for this moment, for the attacks, the bitterness, the decline, rather than for his legitimate contributions to hip-hop. That would be tragic, because the game has talent. He has a legacy worth celebrating, but legacies can be destroyed by the choices artists make when they feel desperate. Final thoughts. This situation is messy, complicated, and honestly, kind of sad when you really think about it. It's a talented artist struggling with his reduced place in the hierarchy and handling that struggle in a way that's making everything worse. It's 2 artists at the top of their game being forced to deal with someone else's insecurity becoming their problem. It's a culture grappling with how to handle veteran artists who refuse to accept graceful transitions. It's an industry that profits from conflict without taking responsibility for the human cost. And it's us, the fans, the media, the consumers, deciding what we want hip-hop culture to be. Do we reward destruction or creation? Do we celebrate bitter attacks or artistic excellence? Do we enable toxic behavior or demand better? Those are questions this beef is forcing us to confront. All right, listen, this story is far from over. We are literally in the middle of what could become one of the most significant beefs in recent hip-hop history, and things are about to get so much crazier.
Documentary 3 is still coming. And if these 4 Gangsta Grills tracks were just the warning shots, we need to prepare for what the game has been holding back. More verses, more allegations, more career-threatening material. reports are suggesting possible releases soon. Could be weeks, could be days. Nobody knows for certain, but the industry is bracing for impact. And Kendrick's response, if he responds, that could drop at any moment. Drake could jump in unexpectedly. Other artists might get involved. This could explode in directions none of us are predicting. I need your thoughts. So drop your opinions in the comments right now because I'm reading every single one. Question 1. Do you think Kendrick has to respond to this, or is strategic silence the more powerful move? Give me a reasoning because I'm seeing strong arguments on both sides. Question 2. Is the game justified in feeling overlooked? Does he have a point about his contributions being undervalued? Or is this just bitter veteran syndrome? Question 3. Where do you rank the game in West Coast hip-hop history? Top 5? Top 10? Does this beef change how you view his legacy? Question 4. Predict what happens next. Full warfare, strategic silence, industry mediation, self-destruction? Give me your bold predictions. Question 5. Who's your favorite in this situation? Are you Team Game, Team Kendrick, Team Drake, or Team This is messy and everyone needs therapy? Seriously, the conversation happening in comments is half the story with beefs like this. Y'all bring perspectives I don't even think of, so don't lurk, engage. Subscribe for every update. And if you made it this far into this video, and we're talking almost 40 minutes of deep analysis, you're clearly invested in this story. So make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on because I'm covering every development as it happens. When the documentary 3 drops, promise, full track-by-track breakdown within hours. When Kendrick responds, if he responds, immediate analysis of every bar, every reference, every subliminal. When industry figures start commenting publicly, I'm bringing you that context and those insider perspectives. This is not a story you want to miss updates on. This is history happening in real time, and we're documenting every twist and turn together. Hit that like button. And if you found this analysis valuable, if you learned something new about the situation, if I gave you a perspective you hadn't considered, if I broke down bars you missed, show love with that like button. It genuinely helps push this video to more people who are trying to understand what's happening. The algorithm favors engagement, and every like tells YouTube, this content is valuable. Show it to more people. Plus, it lets me know y'all are rocking with these deep dive analysis videos. If these are hitting, I'll keep making them. If y'all want different content, let me know in comments. Share this breakdown. If you've got friends or family who are confused about this beef, if they're hearing about it but don't understand the context or the stakes, send them this video. I designed this to be comprehensive. Someone can watch this video and understand not just what's happening, but why it's happening, what it means, and where it's likely going. That's value worth sharing. Final word. Before I let you go, just remember something important. This beef is entertainment for us. We're watching from the outside, analyzing, debating, choosing sides. But for the people actually involved, the game, Kendrick, Drake, their families, their teams, this is real life with real consequences. So enjoy the drama. Appreciate the artistry if these situations produce good music, but don't lose sight of the human beings in the middle of it all. Stay safe out here on these internet streets. Remember that your mental health matters more than any celebrity beef. Don't let this stuff stress you out more than it entertains you. I appreciate every single one of you for rocking with me through this entire deep dive. For real, the fact that y'all will sit through 40 minutes of me breaking down hip-hop beef means the world. I'll see you in the next update, and trust me, with this situation, that next update is coming soon. Until then, keep your eyes on the culture, your mind on the music, and your energy protected from the chaos. Peace.